Alrighty, we are going to be discussing texture, and what I want to do is a very simple seascape. The beach in the front and sky. We're going to concentrate on the sky, and I'm going to show you how to apply texture using a mask, which in this case is a laminated A4 piece of paper. So what happens is we're going to first do the texture that is at the bottom, which is the beach, and then we're going to be flipping the laminated page to do the texture in the sky. So bear with me, I'll chat you through it, and it's real fun. Remember that what you're doing is with the texture, you are actually drawing with texture. So I'm taking the texture out, and I'm going to start with a very little bit. I'm using another palette to just knead my texture so it becomes a little bit more creamy. Now this is really important. When you're using a palette knife for your texture, you need to get, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to get the texture paint on the bottom of my palette knife. And I've got more waiting here to pick up. So I'm not going to be scooping it up too much because I don't want that much texture. A little bit of texture is going to go a long way. You don't need to put too much on. So here we go. I'm going to concentrate on the perspective lines, which in this case are going to run somewhere like that, and they'll come across like that. So this is my foreground is here. So here we go. Let's see what happens. I'm putting the texture on, and I'm using the edge of that laminated piece to give me a kind of sharp texture line. You must also remember, I'm not covering the whole board with texture. I'm putting it on, and then I'm very lightly taking the peaks of that texture off. Okay, we don't want to move the mask. We don't want to move it yet. We're not ready to move it yet. Now I'm picking up more texture paste, and I'm going to continue with my perspective line. So I'm doing it in this fashion, going da 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 like that. And the wonderful part about texture, any texture in your ground, on the surface of your canvas, is texture. It's going to show as texture. It will show as texture. So don't put too much on. Okay. This will then need to dry, and molding my texture as I go. What might be good to point out here is we've got strong light coming from the front of my painting, so I can see the shadow of the texture. I can actually see the shadow of the texture, and it's a good thing to have that. Have a low angled light source. Okay, we're getting to the point where we need to now move the mask. If you want to, we're going to be doing perspective lines in another video. If you are not sure about your perspective lines, then we'll be doing it in another video, but I'm aiming my perspective onto the third line, which is right about there. Could even do a tiny little dot here, a tiny little spot with a pencil. Give you an idea of where we're going. Now I'm moving this across and lining it up with the edge of my canvas, picking up some more texture and putting it on. And something really nice is happening here. I tell you what, once the texture paste is on, I'm finding little hard pieces in the texture, and I'm going to show you a close-up now. But what's happening is it's actually giving me a kind of grassy effect as I drag it, putting it on and then drag it down. And we'll show you a close-up of that as we go along. And we take the texture all the way to the edge here. Okay, so I'm removing my mask, hold it down and then peel it off. I'll put it over there, place it down. Now is where I would like to show you these little texture marks that are happening here. In the shadow area you may see these marks. And that's just by chance, absolutely by chance. So my lines are going this way, but my grass is going this way. At this point in time in your painting, you would probably want to just double check your texture. Make sure you don't have texture in the wrong place, because one can sand the texture down, yes, but that's an unnecessary step. So that's looking good. I hope it's clear on the video footage, because of course it's white on white, but I expect it to be high quality. What we're going to do now is I'm going to leave it to dry. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to come back in the next phase and put another texture piece in, which will be on the other third. Here we've got a third. 1, 2, 3. And then our sky is actually going to go in on the other third. So there's my 1/3 line indicated by the pencil. There's my second third line. So it's 1, 2, 3. And you'll see we're going to get to the point where we're putting the sky into that texture, onto that texture point right there. Don't make a tiny little mark there, it's going to be covered in paint. So we leave it until next time. This must stay in the sun or have a hairdryer and let it set nice and hard. Okay, so what we're now doing, this texture paste in the base of this painting at the seashore has actually dried extremely quickly. So that's just something to let you know. I'm kneading my texture out, flattening it out like you would dough. And now, instead of having straight lines, straightish lines in my texture at the bottom, I'm going to have a curved texture line which is going to come to this point here, which is right on my third line. Okay, and what I'm going to do, spend more time at the top, because that's where my cloud is going to be, and I'm going to be bringing my texture in there. Another thing that I can say is as the texture paint dried in the base, it had these little pieces of little balls of dried texture in it, which created its own separate texture, resulting in possibly grasses in this area in the base. Now you just want to keep an eye on that for the sky, because the sky is going to be a little smoother than that. Okay, so we're bringing the texture into this point here, and the curves out to that point, and it curves out to that point. So that's what we're going to do. It's not going to be straight. So I'm picking up more texture, and that's very heavy, so you don't necessarily want that right now. So we just take some off, and we're not painting. I don't want to paint your typical junior school cloud. So it's not got these little curves and cotton wool balls on it. But I do want this to not have those lines in it. I hope you see it on the video. I'm sure you will. We've got a curve happening here. You've got to watch those lines. So we're going to flatten those lines out and put our next cloud in here. Another thing is when you're doing clouds, you're going to have areas that are quiet with no texture. Whoa, there's a bit of texture. You're going to have areas that are quiet with no texture, and you're going to have areas that you want to have quite heavy texture. And the other thing, the perspective in this sky relies on small marks at the bottom and broader marks towards the top. Broader areas of cloud and sky. We're going to put a piece of sky right in there that is quite heavy. Okay, what you can do if you're getting lines in your texture paint, if you're getting these scratch lines, I don't want those. So while we're busy here, we're going to watch those lines, make sure that we don't have any lines. I'm taking the texture right off this point, and I'm putting more texture at this point. Don't touch the texture too much, or else you just end up with a flat board again. Now there are those little bubbles that I was talking about. I want this to be gone. Okay. That's looking good. So what I'll do is, while this is drying, while the sky area is drying, I'm going to then mix up a color for the base over here. So we got my trusted purple, one of my favorite colors, and we're changing to a Naples yellow. Naples yellow, which is a soft yellow. There's white in the tube already. So let's see what color we get. I'm going to mix it right on my canvas a little bit carefully so that we don't spill onto an unwanted area. And set that aside. And then we're going to have a tiny bit of purple, because purple is a very strong pigment. Okay, get our brush, and medium quality white paint, you know, it's whatever you can afford. You get what you pay for, as they say. So high quality white paint is going to cost a bit more, but you needn't worry too much about that. Acrylic paint has been formulated to all sorts of high qualities, not like it was in the 50s when acrylic paint was still being discovered. Okay, here we are, ready to go. Now what I want to do is, placing my palette very softly, I'm going to wet the foreground. I'm going to wet it with the skin of paint. Okay. And why I'm doing that is so that when I put the paint on, it's going to fall into all the valleys. It's going to fall into all the valleys of this textured paint. I'm putting it on remembering my perspective lines. Remembering my perspective lines. Okay. There is going to be detail on top of this. So this is just treated as if it's an undercoat. I'm getting a little bit more water in there, not too much, but let the water do what it wants to do. We're going to finish. Look, if you can see this, it's amazing. The texture lines that are happening in what I'm calling the grass area. Okay, setting that paintbrush aside, I'm going to get a bit more color, okay, to give it some variation in the tone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, you want to try and imagine that you're actually on this beach. What would you be seeing? You've got this distance, you've got this blank area where there's a bit of dry brush happening, and it kind of goes up. Pick up some more tone. The purple is my tone, so that I've got light and dark pieces happening. And I imagine that the dunes are going up on the side here. So I'm going to kind of indicate it. It's almost wet on wet. wet on wet here, and relying on the texture. The texture is actually the start of the painting, so that's really good. So I've got a small marks to larger marks, and the direction the marks are going in will indicate what that dune is doing. So it's coming from the top, going down into a dip, and then going onto a kind of a flat area where you can imagine that would be marked by footprints in the sand and all sorts of things like that. I'm using my finger here just to merge these marks together. Okay, right in the front, the marks are going to be bigger, and towards the back, the marks are going to be a little bit more obscure. I just pushed it with my finger there. There's color I'm going to put more color in at the top here. And you'll just stick with me and you'll see what the finished painting looks like. I'm putting a little more here. Remember, over the top of everything, over the top of all of this, we're going to get in there with a tiny, tiny brush and get some real close detail in there. Okay. We'll constantly think about being at this beach. You actually imagine yourself right here. I'm using no reference at the moment. I'm using no photograph, and that's not the only way to do it. You can find a copyright-free photograph on the net, or maybe take your own photograph. It's really, really a good idea to have your own reference. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a sharp edge right on that distance there. Right on that distance. And I'm actually using quite a large brush, but I'm giving that point. This is a filbert brush. It's named filbert because of its shape. Beautiful, beautiful brushes. Okay, so I'm getting that distance. Perspective is really important in a landscape and a seascape. Perspective is really important. Getting these little marks in here. Not too sure about the color of that. I'm going to go back to that later. Get some marks in here. You don't have to do it quickly. It can be done steadily and slowly. You can even use your hand as a guide, your hand underneath the other hand. Okay. Now what I want to do, a lot of these marks are showing themselves to me. And that sounds quite crazy, but I'm deciding as I go to say, okay, we're going to put something quite heavy in here, and I'm going to kill this color with another brush. Just soften the color, that's what I mean. Soften this color. I've picked up some water here. Just give it a soft color, and I'm going to indicate how this perspective is working. There's purple. I'm giving myself a bit of purple. It's a little bit watery, and that's a good thing. That's what I want. Wow, that's looking cool. Okay. Now I'm going to indicate how this perspective is working. You can see on the flat part of the distant shoreline, these marks are pretty horizontal. Then they start to go into that kind of angle. Then they dip a little further, and then they become horizontal again. And we're going to leave it just there, waiting for the texture on the sky to dry. Okay, what I'm doing now is I'm taking off these little specks, tiny little specks that are interruptions. So I'll just pick them off. You can even scrape them off with a palette knife. These specks down here, they've got little particles in the acrylic texture paint. This is not a problem down here, but in the sky, you don't want that kind of interruption. So I'm taking it off. Okay, it looks pretty good. And dries very quickly. Dries very quickly. So what I'm doing, I'm going to be washing the sky with an appropriate blue. So I'll use a big brush, just a hardware brush, make sure it's clean. I'll tell you why now, blue and white. So that's what we're mixing around about here, and try and make sure your brush is clean, because yellow and blue make green, and you don't want the sky to be green. You don't want the sky to be green. You want it to have a pure blue. So we're doing the background of the sky. We're not doing the clouds at the moment, and you'll see the texture is going to start coming into play, and that's going to make it work. Okay, so we've got this blue, tiny bit, we don't need a lot for now. And what I'm going to do is scoop out some white. We need quite a bit of white. So we scoop out some white. When I put my colors on my palette, I love a flat palette. I'm not a fan of a palette that has got big scoops, like they're big bowls in it. So I put my colors apart, take a smaller brush, and then what we do is we going to find the color that I want, starting with the white, and bring in some blue, and that's a very nice color for the undercoat of our sky. Yeah, so that's it. I'm going to leave it like that for now. Put my knife down there, take my large brush, and I'm going to just get the sky to get a little bit damp. Just dragging across, not too much water. It's not necessary to have too much water. And I'm going to then, same as this beach area, I'm going to bring my color in, and I'm going to be using my perspective to get these lines across here. So you're just watching as we go, and we're getting this. Remember, the sky gets darker as you get to the higher part of the sky. It gets darker. So we're going to do a plain area here, using a really large brush, kind of crisscrossing the brush, and using this perspective, quite watered down. And we go all the way to the corner, and again I'm starting to see that texture working. There's a little piece of blue that's coming through, like a piece of paint, unmixed paint, and you just keep an eye on it all the time. And I'm using a really big brush here, soften all these areas, and that's starting to give me the shape. At this point I was going to actually stop. At this point I was going to stop and let it dry, but I'm actually going to use this wet paint. So I'm going to come in with a bit of a heavier paint, okay? And back to my favorite brush. Put some blue on the one side of the brush and white on the other side of the brush. There's white and there's the blue. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to be painting maybe a little bit more carefully the blue parts and negative shape. So I'm actually going around my clouded area. And you just use your imagination with clouds, because there are so many shapes of clouds. You can get away with almost anything. Just kind of, if you're not sure, go and stand outside and have a look at a cloud and see what the shape is. Try and remember it and come back inside and paint. I'm flipping my brush to take care of some of these blended areas that I want. And it's looking good, so I'm just going to keep going with this idea. This idea is looking good. I don't really want heavily textured paint strokes. I want to have that sky is a smooth sky for me. and the only interruption is going to be the cloud. So building up, building up, building up. Another thing I can see happening here, the texture paint wasn't completely dry. It's not completely dry, it felt dry, but it wasn't completely dry. So what happens is, if you keep touching it with a wet paint brush, it's going to regenerate it and make it wet again. So you just want to watch that, because you don't want it to become flat. Would have probably been better to just let this dry a little more, get it to the texture paint to dry a little more. What I like to do is have my sky going light to darker, and light to darker. So on the edge I'm getting at the edge of the pardon me, the edge of the sky. Now at this stage of the painting, I would almost turn the painting around so that I'm not cramping myself here, but I'm going to try. You must be comfortable when you're painting. If it's not comfortable, don't be afraid to turn the painting around. And here I've got very little form for my cloud, so I'm going to build a cloud for myself around that point there. So an interesting piece of yellow that's happening there, and I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that as we go along. What happens as well is that this center part is going to be more textured. I'm turning my brush around in this fashion so that the point of the brush gives me the distant horizon. There's a bit of dirt. That's the furthest part in my sky. Furthest, right over there, like 40 kilometers away, 30 miles away. It's far. So that becomes dirty. The color becomes dirty. Okay, there's my texture and my perspective coming in. And my dry brush. I want my dry brush to come in there, picking up the texture of the original canvas. And there's some deeper sky. All pointing down to this 1/3 area. Okay. So I hope you're having fun. It is real fun, because you can do what you like. It's once you've got the basics in, like the perspective and the texture, it actually just becomes fun. As you can see, I'm working from the top of my painting down. It's the same as turning the painting upside down and working that way. But then you've got to keep watching what you're doing. So I'm scratching the paint in. Scratching the paint in, getting this distance. Very small marks coming up this way. Okay, and I'm happy with that sky. Well, not quite finished, but we're getting there. I'm going to darken this end, and that looks cool. I'm happy with that. And darken this corner here. You can also remember that you don't have to work to the edge of the canvas. You can frame it, or you can, this is kind of a restriction here, to have to work to the edge of the canvas. You can cut the canvas down by having a frame put on it. Okay, I'm going to get this to be darker up here, darker, and shaped. Give it a bit of shape. And coming back later on to do the clouds once again, because that's going to be the fun part. Going to get this corner darker, yeah, and then always kind of aiming down towards this point. Now this shape here looks like a strange kind of monster in the sky, and I don't want that to distract from the actual cloud shape. So you just watch some of these shapes, they look a bit weird. And I'm painting very lightly, and constantly moving towards this perspective point here down at the bottom. Okay, and we're almost at the point where we go to the next phase of this painting. And they're just going to finish this quickly. That's it. You must remember, I'm not painting too quickly. I'm just watching it as I go. And here's a piece that needs to just be softened. And then up there, stop and take a look at your painting. And there's a piece that needs to just be softened. There's sharp edges there, which I don't want. I want a kind of misty effect. That's what I'm looking for. It's also maybe my painting style. Okay, so we're going to cut right there, and we're going to come back and we're going to reinforce the clouds in the sky. We might point out at this stage there's a little spot of blue that came in here, and I tried to get it off, but it didn't come off. So you might just soften it by putting something over the top of that. I don't know how that happened. Maybe it was a hair coming out of the brush. Anyway, we'll stop right there, give it about 5 minutes to dry, and we're coming back to the clouds. Okay, so what we're doing now, I want to give you a front view of the painting. Okay, that's what we've got now. Now what I would like to do is I'd like to explain what I'm planning to do. I'm planning to orange and grey these clouds. Okay, so I'm going to give a dirty orange, in other words an orange with blue in it, crossing the color wheel. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the sea in the distance here, which is just a band of blue. I feel that I'm finished down here, maybe some detail, and the last thing we'll do is we're going to put a distant body, a land body in there and in there, and that will reinforce our horizon line. Okay, so that's what we're seeing at the moment. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, put a bit of blue in, because my blue is gone and it's dried. You don't need a lot. We don't need a lot of blue. And I'm going to get my orange ready. So I'm putting my orange far away from my blue. Far away. You don't want that to get mixed up in your blue. Okay, and let's go. Let's see what happens. What I'm using is a really dry brush. So this is another brush. It's a new brush. And I'm going to use very dry paint. Okay, very dry paint. In other words, I'm flattening my paint out where there's hardly any paint on the brush. Start in an area that you feel is confident, that you can feel confident about, and very lightly, in one direction, I'm putting a little orange in there. It's actually Naples yellow, but I'll be using orange as well. Such little paint that this little piece of paint on my palette is already dry. Start with what you know, very lightly. And my brush is going in one direction. I'm lifting it, I'm painting it, lifting it, and going down again. Painting it, lifting it, going down again. Quite quickly. I'll slow it down, but that's going to be painting it, lifting it, and going down onto the canvas. Okay, and it just yellows the cloud. Gives it a bit of warmth, and it brings the cloud towards you. Warm colors come this way, cold colors go that way. It's called advancing and receding, technically speaking. Okay, and now you do it on almost every cloud, like what's happening here. That's cool. And pick up some more Naples yellow is what I'm using, And I'm essentially just touching the top of the cloud. I'm not painting the whole cloud. And there's something else I must mention. You're using a kind of yellow here. If you go into the blue, it's going to make green. So you refer to your color wheel, blue and yellow. Yellow and blue make green. So you don't want a green sky. You want to avoid that. A little bit more there. That's a bit heavy, but it's okay. It's okay. We're going to go back to that, fix that, because it's too heavy. It's too heavy. There we go. Now I'm going to bring in a little bit of orange. A little bit of orange, and this is a bit scary because we're developing a neutral grey here. A neutral grey. I'm bringing white into my orange and blue. Okay. And once again, quite dry. So at the bottom of some of these clouds, I'm going to have a shadowed area, like a shadow part. It has a potential of being too dark, which is exactly what it is here, which means we're going to come back with white. No need to worry. Come back with white and form the cloud again. But what I must say is you do want color in your clouds. Clouds are very, very white, but the only reason you see that very, very white is because there's actually color in the cloud. So what I'm doing now, I'm switching brushes, going back to my white, and I'm going to be reforming these clouds. Reforming them. Not trying to kill the brown or the neutral color. I'm just softening it. Okay, softening it a little more, and I think we're almost done with the clouds after this phase, after this stage of it, and then we're going to come into the sea, because this at this stage looks like a landscape. That's very funny. I thought it was a seascape. Well, we're making it into a seascape. Hey, that's actually looking good. Soften these neutral colors. They will always be there. Very difficult to cover it. So you just go on and keep an eye on what you're seeing. Keep watching your own painting as it develops. Okay. And I'm pressing into the canvas quite firmly. I don't want too much texture from my brush. I've got lots of texture coming in from the undercoat, which was texture paint. So I think I'm done with that phase of it, which means we can set that aside. I'll get one of my favorite brushes, and I'm going to position myself a little bit over to the one side so that I can create the sea in that distance. Wet my brush. The sea I want it to be quite strong. So the color is actually quite strong. So it's a tiny part of the painting. So it's okay if it's strong. I'm putting my hand over here and I'm giving myself a distant sea. Okay, and I'm watching it, push it down, lift it up, push it down, lift it up, push it down. Once again, it's on the third line, right about here. This patch of very bright sea. Okay, don't worry too much about having an absolutely straight line. Your eye sees in funny ways. It sees well, first of all, you've got two eyes, so you're seeing everything twice. And second of all, in nature there are actually very few straight lines, absolutely straight lines. What I'm doing now is I'm turning my brush and I'm going to just break this edge up here. Break it up with a bit of strong white. Okay, you can see there I'm breaking that up. And again, not too worried about absolutely straight lines. The last stage of this painting, well, I think you might like to see this painting as it stands at the moment, so I'll turn it over. Okay. The last stage of this painting is we're going to put a mountain. Well, not a mountain, it's actually just an outcrop of rock. And that's going to be really, really dark. So I'm washing my favorite brush and I'm going to be using a little water, bring some blue into my orange. Okay, into my orange. Bring some blue into my orange. Mix it up really well. And yeah, make sure we don't have any drips happening. And I'm going to be going right across here from small, very small, to rather large rock or distance. That's what we're doing. So what we've got is a body of land. I'm going to turn, I've painted the top of the land mass. Painted the top of the land mass. I'm going to turn my painting over so that I can paint the bottom of my land mass. Okay, and it's going to run as sort of straight as we can. Right across there, right across there, right across there. Okay, then we're going to fill in a little bit here. Chop and change. Add a bit of white. You might even add some Naples yellow. Let's do that. See how the painting is telling me what to do next. I'm adding Naples yellow, pure Naples yellow, and getting a little dimension on this landmass. Okay, now we're going to do this side, which is not going to be the same length, it's going to be a shorter length. You don't want it to be the central painting. You want to avoid having this central kind of feel. While we're here, I'm going to just create a little bit of a dimension on the top here. I'll show you in a minute, which just creates it a little bit irregular is what you're looking for there. I'm picking up my darker paint. Now I'm painting the bottom. Doesn't matter which comes first, bottom or top. Doesn't matter which comes first. The bottom of my landmass. I'm going to flip my painting again. And instead of repositioning myself at this point with the view, I'm going to twist my painting and try and have it a little bit varied from the other one. Try and have it a bit varied. Don't like that shape. That shape's not so good. Change your color a little bit. I'm bringing in some blue. And I'm going to just have these tiny pieces of land coming down into my sea. Wow, that's cool. I'm going to turn it around so you can see what we've done. Okay. And now what we can do, let's have a look at this painting. You could call it finished actually, but I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here and create some high detail, just to reinforce things. I'm going to have a little, your typical kind of pickety fence that comes in here on the beach. Nothing's really straight. Nothing's really straight here. And nothing's regular. You've got a space in between that's large, and you've got small little spots, and then you've got areas that have got poles that are leaning over. I'm going to show you that in a minute. I like what I've done, so I'm going to try and get a similar feel on this side, but not the same. Not the same. It's going to be a little bit varied, and there are lovely texture marks there that I'm just going to leave. They're actually part of the painting. I'm done. And now, to show you what we've done, we've got distance. We've got distance in the mountain. We've got an indication of sea in the far distance. We've got a little bit of detail coming towards you here, and we've got the sky has got color in it. There is one more thing I want to do. I want to bring my white up again. So I'm going to add white, okay, and I'll paint it upside down for me so that you can see the progression. The top of the sky, the top of the clouds are sharper than the bottom. The bottom tends to blur away, and the top is sharper paint strokes. And at this point you may notice that I'm actually bringing a lot of texture in. A lot of texture into the paint. Touching it very, very softly. I'm not pressing hard. Okay, and then find your little bubbles that you want. Change the shape. There's a little bit of a orangey, dirty color coming in here, but that's okay. Dry brush, quite heavy. Put it on quite heavily, and we are close to complete. I'm really, really happy that you've been watching, and I hope you get something out of this painting. Use the ideas, change the ideas, bring your own ideas in, and we will see you in the next video. This is finished. Very happy with it.